Ladies and gentlemen, this is El Cochino, Tom Lawler, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast that puts the lotion on its own skin, LuchaWorld. Bitchin'.
Welcome everyone to LuchaWorld Podcast episode number 131. Fredo Esparza here, and this week we will be talking about the passings of two legends in Lucha Libre, Arturo, Rivera, and Super Muñeco. We'll also be talking about a former CMLL star announcing that he is returning to CMLL, which I think wasn't that big of a surprise, but given the situation, the current circumstances within Lucha Libre and wrestling in general right now, I would say it is slightly surprising, but it isn't a total shock. We'll also be talking about a couple of matches that were announced as part of the tournament, the mass tournament that is being held for by AAA in the upcoming Triple Mania events that will be happening this year, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the formation of AAA. We'll also be talking about a few other things, including the 2021 Tapati Awards results. The reason I'm going to talk about this, one, the fact that Cubs fans still keeps doing this year-end award for Lucha Libre. I think he might be the only one that actually does this, because I don't even think any of the Spanish websites have really gone out of their way to do this sort of thing. I think for the most part, everybody that has a website might do like their whole, the person running it or whoever is in charge of writing about Lucha Libre will do an awards type of thing that they give out themselves personally, but not really something where you're doing ballots from other individuals that are sending them into your website to do this. So this is something that I think is we should talk about, because I mean, even though it's still a smaller, it's not like it's the Observer Awards where there's a larger amount of people voting, given there's a larger fan base for anything involving, WWE, AEW, or Japan. Within Lucha Libre, it's very it's a smaller niche that really doesn't get a lot of for whatever reason. As much as we try, there's not a lot of it just doesn't get a lot of traction as far as new people voting. Every once in a while you get new people, but then you'll also have some people that just won't vote. Like in this case, the last couple of years, I mean, it's been very difficult to even consider Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year, because there's so much that's gone on. A lot of shows being postponed because of the pandemic. And then, of course, the AAA and CMLL kind of being a little bit harder to watch, because as far as live, because both promotions are just, they got their own issues when it comes to that. CMLL just not, you have to pay to watch CMLL shows. And for the most part, I think a lot of people have kind of gotten a little more, there's a little more disinterest in CMLL. It's grown over the years, and I would say right now it's probably at an all-time low. And those Ticketmaster live shows, I would imagine minimum amount of people are watching it. I don't think, other than Cubs fan, and on occasion I've seen Rob talk about it, and maybe like one or two other people talk about it. But for the most part, I don't really see a lot of people, especially, and it's not just like the English-speaking Lucha fan base that I'm talking about, which is a very small group. But I'm talking about like Mexico. You very rarely see people talk about it other than the websites that actually have access to attend the shows, or who, maybe somebody's like paying to watch it just to report on it. But you're really not getting a lot of, it's not like it's being talked about a lot. And with AAA, of course, the lawsuit, they haven't been streaming a lot of their shows for the last year and a half, 2 years. It's really mostly been the Cubs fan streaming it on his Twitch channel. And then most recently they did do the whole, that one show on Fight TV. I think it's, what is it, Fight or just Fight TV? I don't even know, just because there's been so many of those services. I can't keep up with them. We'll talk about that later on, because I do find it interesting, just because it kind of shows you the way that fans are thinking. It kind of also tells you what they're watching and what they're not watching, because really, I think right now it's really been a lot more about AAA getting more views. The matches that do well get a lot of interest. For the most part, matches that are considered match of the year candidates are going to get talked about. But like with CMLL, if they air it on Ticketmaster Live and nobody sees it, odds are that's not going to be talked about, as opposed to like when we've had a couple of matches that have streamed on AAA TV and Cubs fan makes it available on his Twitch channel. They get a lot of response. A lot of people start talking about them. People recommending those matches to other people. So it kind of like there's a little bit more of that. Whereas CML, you really, I don't, other than the Volador Jr. Bandito match from last year, there really wasn't. I don't think there was anything that got a lot of feedback or reaction from fans online. Like even like stuff that those of us who are more like willing to watch these shows, if we say something's good, it still won't get a big reaction compared to what AAA's done. So, honestly, I mean, we even see like some of the indie promotions that aren't really getting a strong reaction either. Just because there is a lot available online for free on YouTube. But I mean, you're going to have to be like a really, really hardcore fan, willing to go through, the independent promotions and watch that stuff and, go through the good, the bad, the ugly of Lucha Libre shows, which can at times not even have good. But I mean, there are some fans that are really into it and will do it. And that's the good thing, is that a few of them do share their opinions on matches. So then when they recommend it, other people watch it. Unfortunately, a lot of those recommendations end up coming in on these year-end awards type of post that people put up on their websites, which, usually means that people watch it afterwards and probably, that match probably would have gotten a stronger reaction, more responses if it was done more on real time, as opposed to like months later or a year later. Anyway, that's all we'll be talking about this week. But before we get to all the current news, the current news as far as what's going on within the wrestling promotions, we really have to talk about the two passings that happened on Wednesday. It was kind of interesting because prior to Tuesday, there really wasn't a lot of news. Really, the big story recently was the whole Stuka Jr. Atlantis Jr. Rivalry, and then AAA's really been kind of quiet. Some of the other stuff that came about during the weekend prior to the big news day of Tuesday and Wednesday was that Gringo Loco and Psycho Clown had a really good match on a Game Changer wrestling show, and Dr. Wagner Jr. Psycho Clown confronted Dr. Wagner Jr. on that show as well. So that was kind of like the big talk. Not a lot else going on as far as Mexico. It's very hard to like envision and even like if you wanted to, like there really hasn't been anything major going on the independent scene. They do their shows, but it's like they've really not been doing anything that's been that big. I mean, unless you consider the Torneo El Protector from IWRG a big deal. It's just another tournament, honestly. Happens, everybody writes about it, and then we forget about it within 3 or 4 days later, which happened this time. I really thought that the big news this past week was going to be the whole announcement of the 4 first round matches in the Ruleta de la Muerte mass tournament that's going to be held across the 3 Triple Mania shows this year. And for about 1 day, that really was the news. And then the news broke that Super Muñeco had passed away. That was very early on Wednesday. And then later on Wednesday, the other news broke that Arturo Rivera had also passed away. I think it was something that we were kind of preparing for, because a week prior, both of them were in the news. Super Luchas had actually reported that Super Muñeco was hospitalized with an illness. They mentioned it was a lung issue. I know one of the other wrestlers that they talked to had mentioned that. I think Ricky Boy was the one that mentioned that it was a lung issue. And there were a couple of other reports that said he was battling COVID. I think both of them probably had some aspects of having to dealing with COVID, but they were already like, both Arturo Rivera and Super Muñeco had other health issues. So really it's kind of like just everything kind of hitting them all at once. And, unfortunately, it was their time. And around that time that they mentioned Super Muñeco's issue, there was also a social media tweet or post that asking for blood donations for Arturo Rivera. So that kind of started to make it sound like he was also in poor health. He had been in poor health for a while. I was watching an interview that he did last year, and he was talking about how he got hit on a leg during a match, and I guess it cut. He got a bruise and it cut, and I think from whatever he was dealing health wise, it was a very serious wound. So he actually had to he actually took some time. It took quite a bit of time for it to heal, but from hearing that he had that type of wound, having heard of some of his previous health issues and his battle, he was very open about his battle with alcoholism over the years. You could kind of tell that this was something that was gonna, something was gonna happen at some point, because as soon as they start posting those things about asking for blood and being you're being hospitalized, something's, it's not going to be very, very rarely will you see somebody who just like goes to the hospital and then they're doing all these concern posts about them. Very rarely will you see a comeback where they end up not full recovery and they're healthy for several more years. This kind of sounded a little bit more like it was a dire situation for both men. Yeah, it's Super Muñeco. If you grew up a lucha fan in the 80s, he was probably one of the big stars that you got to see. He wasn't at the level of the big stars, but he was kind of in the middle group, a legit superstar. I would compare it kind of like a comparison, honestly, is like if you put Hulk Hogan or The Rock, and then you had maybe like the next group, and then you had like I'm trying to think like somebody who's like Hall of Fame worthy, but isn't quite there yet, but was like a huge baby face. I would say maybe like a Ricky Steamboat type, where he wasn't the top star, but he might be like the second or third biggest name on the babyface side. That's kind of what Super Muñeco was for a large part of his career. Not large part of his prime years, from 83 all the way about early 91, 92. As far as a singles wrestler, he kind of starting Trio Fantasia kind of made him an even like that kind of kept him a little more relevant for several more years, even like post when he just got really, really bad in the ring, and it was basically just a nostalgia act, which was probably by the late 90s. I would say Super Muñeco, if you were to compare his, I would say he had about a longer stretch of being a top star, but in a similar case to Octagon. Guys who were like huge stars when they were very young, when they were kind of like getting that character over, they were huge stars. And then like maybe like a couple years later, they kind of started their star started to dim. And the only difference was that, well, I mean, actually Octagon had Hijo del Santo for a bit, so that kind of kept him prolonged his career a little bit longer as far as being a star. But after maybe like 98, 99, Octagon was pretty much kind of a shell of himself, but he was still kind of viewed as a star by the fans. Whereas Super Muñeco, he was able to like transition from being that single star to where he was able to have that trio with Trio Fantasia. And so even if as a single star he wasn't doing well, he had the trio to go to, and that would actually still draw pretty well. So in many ways, I think that's where he kind of had the advantage, where he actually had the trio that was, he was recognized as part of that trio. People could always book them as a trio on the independents, and they would still do pretty reasonably well. I remember when I wrote this in the obit. One of the first lucha matches I watched was Trio Fantasia. I don't remember who their opponents were. I guess now I know that was Super Lunes. That was, yeah, because I remember it wasn't on a weekend. I remember it's like a weeknight when I would watch that show. So I guess it must have been Super Lunes. It must have been Super Libres. I just didn't realize it was that was airing at that point in time in it was basically airing on a Spanish station that would come in from Mexico. We lived in El Paso at that time, and so I don't know if it was an affiliate of the local Juarez station or what, but we got one of the shows. I was like a little kid back then, and I remember my dad telling me he wanted to watch something on TV. He was laying on the bed, and so I got up, started changing the channel. My dad wasn't really into like anything in English that was like dramas. He was only like, the only English my dad would watch would be the news. Actually, he did have one show he would watch, Golden Girls. He loved watching Golden Girls. Those were the only things he would ever watch. 227 was another one. Well, I guess those were like two sitcoms he would watch, just because it was a very light comedy. It wasn't anything too raunchy or too like weird for him. But like he wouldn't watch anything that was like a drama. He wouldn't watch movies in English. All he would watch was news, and he tells me keep changing it. I get to one of the Spanish channels, and they're showing Lucha Libre. Trio Fantasia's in the ring. I look at it, I'm like, man, that's some trippy. I just thought it was really weird, and so we stopped. We watched it. I had already been watching Lucha through the Lucha movies, but from that point forward, watching that kind of led to me watching more. I was already watching American wrestling, so I was already watching WWF at that time, World Class, Mid-South Wrestling. But this kind of like started to draw me into Lucha Libre, so I started watching Juarez Lucha and whatever would air on some of the other Spanish stations. And so, yeah, for me, like Trio Fantasia was kind of like the group that got me into Lucha. And it's kind of funny because you look at what it is that they were, a clown, 3 grown men dressed as a clown, Mighty Mouse, and Pinocchio. And you would think that would be like the weirdest thing. Obviously for a kid, it's not that weird, but even as I got older and I met fans who were into Lucha, we could talk about like these 3 guys and we were perfectly fine talking about them, the Ninja Turtles, Thundercats. It wasn't viewed as like, oh, look at these guys, they were weird or anything like that, because they could actually have good matches or like bloody brawls. They either had good matches or they had bloody brawls. There was no middle. There was never no middle. Ninja Turtles could have good matches. Thundercats could have good matches. Trio Fantasia was more of a, like, they could have okay matches, but they were always more into the brawling, and they had more wild brawls than anything else. Just because, Super Raton was a really good worker, but Pinocchio and Super Pinocho and Super Muñeco weren't that great. But they were still a fun trio to watch. I just remember like they kind of like were the trio that first got me into Lucha, and then once you start rooting for the heels, you start more going for the Misioneros, Los Brazos, those type of trios, or you start rooting for the other heels like Cien Caras, Ari Romero, Conan when he turned heel. You end up rooting more for heels than the Paraguayo when he was a heel. Sangre Chicana. The cool thing is that even in Lucha, like the heels, some heels, they would be heels in one territory, but then they would be kind of treated as baby faces in other places. So you would have like a Satanico who could be a heel one minute and then be a baby face in another place. But I kind of started more finding Rudos to be my thing more than anything else. Although I still was a big fan of Technicos, but it was more like the Technicos I liked were guys who were like more high flying. They kind of had the similar work style of Ricky Steamboat. So like a Lizmark, Atlantis, guys who were just clean cut babyface. I really liked that. I never was really into like the guys who were kind of like, he was a heel once. But to me, they were heels. They have to be heels. They shouldn't be like. I always thought they were like just traitors or whatever. But Eddie Guerrero was another one that very early on was like the type of technical that I really liked. I kind of liked the guys who just were like really good workers in the ring as far as technicals. Whereas the Rudos, I liked the fact that they were like just like they looked like they could beat you up. That's what I liked. There was always like that soft spot for Trio Fantasia, just because. I mean, like I said, who doesn't want to root for like a Mighty Mouse, a barrel-chested Mighty Mouse? I mean, the guy had to be like 5'5", and like 200 plus, 250 pounds, and looked like a little tank. But the guy could work. Super Muñeco, I always dug the whole head bobbing thing that he would do, the swivel. Just something I always thought was really like a funny thing to do. And the difference between, I think I could actually like get behind Super Muñeco, and I could never get behind Octagon, just because my thing with Octagon was like the whole, like when he would get his tassels, from his mask tied to the rope. I just hated the fact that they would do that spot constantly, and it always was his downfall during certain falls when he would lose or his team would lose. And at least with Super Muñeco, he was just, if he was gonna lose, he was gonna lose because it's getting beat down. But I always thought they were really cool. They were a fun trio to watch. They made appearances later in their careers on CMLL shows, and other than Super Raton, the other two just did not look good. I think the second time they were there, they did on one of the legend shows in Arena, Mexico. They were doing a feud, like Super Pinocho and Super Muñeco were having issues, so they were kind of trying to do the breakup angle, and they were doing it in CMLL as well. And it just didn't work, because obviously this was more of a thing that was happening in the independents, and they were bringing it to CMLL, and it just didn't really work. It just looked really weird, and it went nowhere. Nobody thought that either one of them was going to drop their mask. I think Super Pinocho probably should have dropped his mask, but Super Muñeco, he could have dropped his mask at some point. But it's like, there are certain guys that I think kind of have to keep their gimmick around. I think when he came around, also, I was a big fan of Cepillín at that. Right before that, maybe like 2-3 years prior to that. But Cepillín, the clown, famous Mexican clown, he was a huge star, and even though he was like a kid character. Even as you got older, you kind of still kind of viewed him as, hey, he was a cool, like, it wasn't like, oh, I can't believe I like that guy or that clown or anything. He was the clown, but the character, but the guy still, like, it was something like nobody's thought of you being like weird if you like Cepillín, because he was already like, so many kids were into it, and he didn't come across as too weird of a character. But I don't know. I was really sad when I saw that Super Muñeco had passed away, and even before that, when I heard about his health issues. Somebody that was really, really to me a star in the 80s. I think he probably, like, if you ask me where he ranks as far as greatest stars of all time, he definitely has to be up there as far as stars of the past 40 years. He's not at the level of the, there's so many guys that you would probably put ahead of him, but he's got to be up there. To me, he kind of falls into like the category that you would put Super Porky, Brazo de Plata, just because they were so unique as far as charismatic characters within Lucha Libre, that they actually had a really strong following, and they kind of like, it's kind of like for many kids or fans that grew up watching them, it's like you lose part of your childhood when that wrestler passes away. And Super Muñeco to me fell into that category. Artudo Rivera's passing came, I think they made the announcement hours after. Again, someone else who was dealing with a lot of health issues. And again, another person that, like, if you grew up on Lucha Libre from 1990 forward, he was the voice of Lucha Libre. He was the voice of AAA. At times, he was the voice of CMLL, EMLL. I think there was like a brief run in like the early 2000s that they brought him back to call some matches for CMLL because they were still on Televisa. And that just didn't work out that much because obviously by that point in time, Arturo Rivera was basically very much AAA. When you think of AAA, there's a handful, like I would say, like if you're thinking of 5 people that best represent AAA as far as these people are AAA, I think you have to go with Antonio Peña, the La Parca character, be it LA Park or La Parca, both of them. The La Parca character is a big part of AAA. Conan is another one. I would say Octagon would be the other one, and Arturo Rivera. As far as those would be the 5, I think you would have to start putting in Psycho Clown into that group. And, in some respects, you would actually, Rey Mysterio would probably fall into that. But I think Rey Mysterio kind of has already become a far bigger, what he did in AAA was within a short period of time, whereas now he kind of probably is viewed more as a guy who was a big star in WWE, more of an international star because he's been in WWE, WCW. To me, Rivera, like, you got to put him up there. Like, it's like it's not even close. Just because when you think of AAA, and even like Jesus Zuniga, I would put in that list of people that when you think of AAA, those are the people you really think about. Arturo Rivera, the voice of AAA for so many years, the heel voice of Lucha Libre. Even when he was without Dr. Alfonso Morales, he was still the heel voice of Lucha Libre. Very much like Bobby the Brain Heenan or Jesse the Body Ventura, where they're the guys you think of when you think of heel announcers. He was in that role, and I found it interesting how he came up with that idea. I would imagine they probably saw some American wrestling or had heard about American wrestling and how they had a heel announcer in the commentary booth, so it kind of made it a little bit easier. And I thought it was a very creative thing, especially because what you had is basically Arturo Rivera being an over-the-top Rudo cheerleader, and then you had Dr. Alfonso Morales, very much, if you watch a lot of Memphis wrestling with Lance Russell, very similar to Lance Russell in the way he would treat interviews with heels when the heels would react or over exaggerate a story they're telling. Yeah, and Lance Russell would be like, yeah, come on, whatever. Come on, Jerry, you don't mean that. Or come on, Jimmy, you don't mean that. That was the same thing with Arturo Rivera. He would kind of like, he would always be like, yeah, come on, that's ridiculous. You kind of got the whole sense of Morales was going to be the straight man in the booth, never wavering from being, kind of like calling the show like it's a real sport, whereas Arturo Rivera's kind of being over the top about how there's a foul and it's not even a real foul. And I thought that the chemistry that they both had, and then later on Rivera with other people on AAA shows, I mean, I thought it worked really well. I think the later years, I think the drinking and also his ego kind of took the best from him, and he kind of started being a little more about him being part of the show, being over the top on certain things. Although I think he might have been the first one that, if I recall, he might have been the first one that started singing the Ciber, whenever they would introduce Cibernetico and they would do the whole Ciber, they would do the Ole, but with Cibernetico's name. I always got a kick out of that. I think Jesus Zuniga would continue that on afterwards, or whenever Rivera wasn't on the show, he would continue it as well. I just thought that was like, I thought he was without question, he was really great. Like most people in wrestling, there's a period of time where they kind of just burn out on it and they kind of start just going at half speed and they're not as good as they used to be. And that pretty much happened with Arturo Rivera. But, for a lot of us who grew up watching Lucha in the 90s, early 2000s, Arturo Rivera was a big part of our lives as far as viewing professional wrestling. And, it's sad to see that too. They both passed away. I wrote obits for both of them, so you could check it out on LuchaWorld.com. To me, it was just sad. I mean, I don't really know. There's no other words to describe the feeling when I heard they both passed away. To me, it was sad, just because a part of what I grew up watching, as far as wrestling goes, had just gone, especially with Dr. Alfonso Morales having passed away. I think he passed away I think Dr. Alfonso Morales passed away maybe 2 weeks prior to my dad passing away. And then Super Porky passed away last summer. So, really, like those four to me were like such a big part of my wrestling viewing from the mid 80s all the way like to the early 2010s, really, because they were still around. And just the fact that they were no longer there in some capacity, it just kind of hits you that, some of your childhood is gone. It was funny because I think Betty White passed away, in January as well, like a week prior to her birthday. And that was all the Golden Girls were gone too. So it's like, oh, all these childhood heroes that I used to like to watch on television are now gone. It's very sad. But you have your memories of them, and life goes on, and you hope other people are make their way into, into pro wrestling, that can continue on the tradition that these people who passed away paved the road for them to do. For every person that passes away, there's always somebody else that kind of like, to me, it's like whenever, like when I see people talk about, wrestling's not like it used to be. And like all you hear about is like, they only pop up when somebody passes away to talk about, oh, he was great and so. And then like the only other stuff they'll talk about is like, wrestling nowadays sucks. But to me, it's like, you just find new stuff to continue watching. Like, to me, like, who would have thought, like, in between these two deaths, if you think about it, in between these two deaths, we had the announcement of the AAA, the 4 first round matches in the AAA tournament. I think there was some conversation with Hijo del Vikingo, or he did something, and I remember thinking about that. Well, I mean, like I said, the 2021 Tapati Awards, when I saw Hijo del Vikingo on so many of the, he got placed high in a lot of the categories. That kind of like, he's somebody that kind of keeps it going for me as far as wanting to be a fan. And then you have Mascara Dorada's announcement. That happened in between these two passings. So there's always something to watch, something to continue watching. So, even though you can't really, you feel sad, there's always something to look forward to, and you got to keep going. You can't let something keep you down for too long. You just got to keep going. That's just how I feel. And the memories I got from both of these people, it'll last for a lifetime. I guess that's all I could say about that. It was a very sad Wednesday, albeit in between there was a little bit of excitement as we got some news. I think a lot of people got really excited just because of the announcement, but I think later on, I think when I was talking about it on Twitter, I kind of knew more or less what was going on. And then Rob and a couple of people were, Cubs fan also pointed it out, that the paperwork, obviously he has to work on some immigration paperwork and documents and all that. So we don't know when he's going to show up. But the big news on Wednesday as well, in between the two passings of Super Muñeco and Arturo Rivera, was Mascara Dorada finally made his appearance on CMLL Informa. That's when you know someone is back in CMLL. When they make an appearance on CMLL Informa, which was again back hosted by Julio Cesar Rivera, who said he was on vacation. I don't really buy it. I think he probably had COVID and probably just took an extra time off. Although I would think 10 days. Actually, he missed one Friday prior to that, so maybe they just wanted to, like, for precaution, they just, instead of making it the 10 days, they just did 2 weeks. It kind of, to me, that kind of like, that's what it kind of felt like, that they took a little bit more precaution with that. But he was back, and with him, towards the end of the, like right before the last hit, I think it was in the middle of the show, they had Mascara Dorada live via Skype or Zoom or whatever they're using for video. I think it was Zoom. And in between, right before he froze and they lost the connection, he made the announcement that he was coming back to CMLL. I think this is like not surprising, but at the same time, maybe surprising. I will say why both reasons right now is, as far as not surprising, is that I think Mascara Dorada, of all the guys who have left CMLL over the last 5 to 10 years, I would probably put Mystico highest as far as one of those guys I always thought would come back at some point. The only way I would have never thought Mystico would have come back to CMLL would have been if he would have succeeded and been comfortable as another character somewhere else. But he kind of always, kind of like it always was, he was always Mystico, like the fit. It just worked for him to be Mystico. Of course, it took him a while to become Mystico again, but this past year, he finally was able to come back to the character. And the other ones, I always thought maybe they would come back at some point were, of course, Averno, who made his way back last year as well, and Mascara Dorada. Like everybody else, the way they left and the whatever they did as far as post CMLL, it always kind of gave me the indication there was no chance of them coming back. To me, like Sombra as Andrade, I didn't think he would come back to CMLL just because he had kind of been a semi-star in WWE, where he was pretty much a known name there, and everybody, like, if they didn't think he was if they were wondering what was wrong with him, it was mostly that they were thinking he was underutilized in WWE. So when they think about him like that, it wasn't like with Mystico where they thought, oh, he totally bombed in WWE. That wasn't the case with like Andrade. Andrade, there were still some people who thought, he never really got a fair shot. And the other reasons I always thought, like, since he was with Charlotte, I just couldn't imagine him being full-time in CMLL, just because at that point in time, and the way he would talk about wrestling and the way he kind of viewed wrestling, it kind of seemed more like he was already beyond CMLL. It was more about, trying to make the most money possible. And obviously now he's in AEW. Other guys like Tejano Jr., the fact that Tejano Jr. was in Lucha Underground, had some success appearing on U.S. shows. I think he was on Impact a few times. Obviously with AAA and them appearing on American, doing taping shows in the United States. They did that one show in New York. I always kind of felt like it's probably less likely that he would come back. There's certain guys I just don't think would ever come back. Mascara Dorada, even though he was in WWE, and there were a lot of people who were in WWE, like Brian Danielson, who spoke highly of him, that I always thought, maybe he would come back, go to somewhere else. Maybe he would go to AEW. Maybe he would consider working AAA or being an independent. I think the only reason I thought he would come back to CML is that his character is tailor-made for the promotion. A high flyer who basically, to me, it's more of a, he doesn't really have the charisma that Andrade has. Even when Andrade had a mask, I never thought Mascara Dorada had that type of charisma. Mascara Dorada to me was more of a worker than anything else, like a guy who could just he could bust out a cool dive. He could come up with a good match. Just a guy who's really good. But I never really viewed him as like somebody who was like, oh, he's going to be a huge star in WWE. When he went to WWE, like I said, it caught me off guard at first when he went to WWE. The fact that they were kind of like, when they picked him, I thought, okay, maybe, yeah, because, it didn't seem as weird because they were bringing in so many guys that normally you wouldn't think WWE was interested in at that time. And obviously, as we saw over the years, they really kind of just brought them in just to keep them from going some other places. But I just always thought he seemed like a better fit in CMLL. Even like if you look at if he would have gone to AAA, I think he probably would have been somebody who they probably would have brought in, put him against probably Hijo del Vikingo or Phoenix, given him at least one big singles match. Then they probably would have lost interest in him, and probably he would have just slowly dipped into the Loretto, like even lower than Loretto Kid, kind of like in the Octagon Jr, Mystices Jr group, guys who are kind of good, but they're kind of going to be stuck there as just, good high flyers that are going to be in trios matches. Not really the top star. And to me, I think he has a better shot of being a top star in CMLL than he would in AAA. And his, honestly, his character just fits. His personality fits more CMLL. Unfortunately, he's going to a promotion right now that's really, really having a lot of issues. Obviously, the pandemic, COVID-19 has really taken a hit on CMLL. We've seen, if you've been following CMLL since late December, you're seeing how often they constantly have to change their lineups because people are missing due to COVID. I think at one point there were like at least 8 or 9 people that were going to be on shows during a week, and those shows all like the lineups completely changed. And then they started bringing in more minis and more people that not really top stars, but just undercard. I think to me, when they like started bringing in like the Sons, like Pentarita del Ring Jr., guys like that, Valiente Jr. when he was supposedly going to debut in Puebla, that to me is like fresh and new. But when they started bringing in like the guys who you really don't think have a shot, it didn't really to me it's like, Raider again. I mean, he didn't really do anything the first time around. He was there one time, and it's like, if he was there one time, what's the point? It kind of felt like they were just trying to find bodies to fill shows, especially right now, because it's not just the guys missing because of COVID. You have a couple of guys like Raciel and Valiente who are out with injuries, and it's really like the lineups it's taken a toll. The fact that all those guys that left previously are no longer there. And I'm not talking about like the old guys like Shocker, that type of guy. I'm talking about like when NGD, Dragon Lee, Mystico, when those guys left, it kind of like, now you see, you're like, okay, they really are in need of talent. Puma King, guys like that. You see that they really do need talent. But at the same time, even if those guys were there, it would be like how many years? Like 10 years that they would have been there. So it's like it just felt a little repetitive. I just think they need to bring in some new blood. And Mascara Dorada has been gone since late 2016. So him coming back, it doesn't feel fresh just because there really hasn't been a huge, even though there's been a lot of talent that has left CMLL, there's still a lot of people that have been there since, the early 2000s. So like Mystico, Ultimo Girl, Volador Jr., pretty much all the guys he was there. I mean, the only big difference is really Templario. I'm trying to think who the guys that are new on top that are different for him. Hell, even Averno's back, and he was there when he was there. So it's it's not this huge difference of talent on top. I think Hechicero was there. I think Hechicero was actually just Hechicero was actually like in the mid card when Mascara Dorada was there. So even that, like Cavernario was there. Everybody, like, I think other than Templario, I mean, you have a couple of young guys that are kind of moving up, but it's really been Templario. Atlantis Jr. is the other one that wasn't there prior to when Mascara Dorada was there. So there's maybe like a handful of new guys, but it's still it's still a similar group, and the mentality now is even worse than it was when Mascara Dorada was there. When I think the biggest difference is that Paco Alonso isn't around now, and that is where I think is going to be the big issue down the road. The fact that they're like Chavo Lucharoth and his son are so much more stricter, more traditional, and more follow the similar path that the Lucharoth family has done so with the promotion, where they don't, to them it's all about how much they're making and what they're doing as far as, they don't really to them all talent is replaceable. So like to them, if Mascara Dorada or anybody leaves, they just replace them with somebody else. They'll, like I said, like Dragon Lee leaves, they bring in Fugaz. Mystico leaves, they just hand the mask over to Caristico, rename him Mystico, and they probably would have given it to somebody else, and just continued on. It's like they don't really see a big difference in like a guy being super talented, Dragon Lee being super talented. They'll let those guys go, and they'll easily replace them with another guy who's not even at their level. And it's not like CML doesn't have talent right now. It's just that they have a lot of talent, but they have talent, but there's a lot of bad workers as well. There's a lot of guys who are really old, and then there's a lot of people who have been around for so long that it's like the fans don't really care about them. They don't see any like reason for them to still it's not like, other than the Cancerberos moving up because of the fans kind of rooting for them, and Rey Cometa and Espiritu Negro, you don't really have that other group underneath that is really that type of guy. Like you don't have like remember like 10 years ago, we would complain about somebody still working openers. I think right now, other than Suicida, I don't think anybody's really getting too worked up about the guys working openers. It's like, Robin's still in the openers, big deal. Inquisidor, who cares? Anybody like Oro Jr., nobody, he's never going to move up. It's like there's too many guys, like the whole group with Volador Jr. I was going to do this article on the things I like to see in CMLL, and one of them was to see Volador Jr. teaming up with his faction, Los Depredadores. And, honestly, if Titan's not in the group, I don't really see the point in that group even existing, just because I don't think any of them are really going to be guys who that are going to matter. They're even like, I remember when Triton left CMLL, and I thought, honestly, and people were telling me like, he's talented. I go, yeah, he's talented, but it's like, is he that talented? Is he Titan? They're not losing Titan. They're not losing. It's not like they lost Dragon Lee. When you lose Triton, that wasn't Dragon Lee level or even Dragon Lee level. I mean, I don't really hear a lot about Dragon Lee now. Remember when Dragon Lee was the talk of the town? I mean, right now it's really Hijo del Vikingo. That's really the guy who's hot. You don't hear about Dragon Lee at all. Like, there's no real like buzz about him. Like, you don't hear people say, "Oh yeah, I want to watch a Dragon Lee match." It's really Hijo del Vikingo's the one that's getting a lot of attention. But like when Triton left, I thought, he's a good wrestler, but like honestly, like other than maybe being in a cool trio, I don't really see him becoming this, suddenly, like he didn't have the motivation. Like, to me, the guy that really if you're going to look at somebody who I think more luchadors should model their careers after, is somebody like Laredo Kid. Laredo Kid could have been a trios guy his entire career. Been happy working in Mexico as a trios guy his entire career. You know, it could have been him, and, you know, throw in whoever you want to throw in, Reiko Meta, Aerostar, Drago. He could have been in a cool trio like that. Could have gone anywhere, just found two more high flyers, been a perfectly fine, good trio. But what happens? He gets a visa to work in the United States, starts working indie shows, starts making a name for himself. There were those stories. He wasn't in AAA at that time. He'd come in and out of AAA every so often. But, you know, remember there were those stories about Laredo Kid, WWE having interest in Laredo Kid, and that nothing ever happening from that. But he slowly kept working. People were like, you know, he's okay. He's a good worker. He was a good worker. Indies, success. Then he returns to AAA. And then, like, it kind of clicked. It just clicked. He kind of just became a really, really talented wrestler. Got to work with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. Got to work with some bigger, high-profile international names. And now look at him. He's like, honestly, he's got to be one of the top 5 or 6 guys that gets asked about as far as lucha. Do you hear any, like, if you put a list of the top 5, 6 luchadors that are requested internationally, how many of them are CMLL guys? If you said 1, I'd be shocked. Odds are none of them, just because there really isn't, like, they're so interchangeable. It's like the way they've created the promotion. So you bring in Mascara Dorada, and he kind of falls into that category, and I worry about that, because I think he's probably somebody who, you know, he could do a lot more, but I think he's kind of more comfortable being in CMLL. The trouble there is the fact that with the like I said, the Lucha family, they're going to make it very difficult for him to work independent shows. I think it's really going to depend on the U.S. indie promoters and promoters in Mexico, realizing that there's a certain way you could book CMLL talent. And if you could figure it out without getting them offended or upset, then you're going to be on their good side. And I think that's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to have to figure out a way where, you know, like, let's say Game Changer Wrestling wants to bring in Mascara Dorada again. You can't bring in anybody who works with AAA. So you can't bring in Psycho Clown. You can't bring in these guys. But now you're going to start developing this other problem. Some of those international guys are going to work AAA shows because AAA is more open to working with those guys. So now we just saw Gringo Loco has been announced for an upcoming show. You're going to hear more guys from the US that are indie guys that are going to end up working AAA shows. As soon as those guys work those shows, it's going to lead to, like, CMLL kind of being like, hey, this guy worked AAA. You can't work that show. And they don't really understand that the guy may have worked one AAA show, but he's not working AAA every single week or every single show. It's like, it's just a one-time thing. You might do something down the road, but it's not like a regular thing there. And so it's just going to lead to more issues. And I think that's what I worry about with Mascara Dorada. He's either going to end up having that issue, or he's going to end up being just happy to be somewhere and end up just being a guy who just, you know, goes through the motions in CMLL. We've seen that. We see it with Volador Jr. Volador Jr., it really comes down to his opponent. If his opponent brings a little bit more to the table, he's going to be a little bit more motivated, and the match is going to look a lot better. But as soon as he's in there with somebody who just is either green and can't work properly or can't really elevate the match to bring more out of Volador Jr., you're just going to get the same thing that you get from Volador Jr., which is, you know, the stuff we've been watching for 20 years. So I think that could happen with Mascara Dorada. Hopefully I'm wrong. Maybe he's going to have, like, he's just going to be happy to be out of WWE, and, you know, hopefully, like, early on, that's going to be, like, his thing. Hopefully that's what we get. You know, I'm not sure, but you never know. I mean, it's like, to me, like, I look at, like, someone like Titan. Titan is somebody that, like, it doesn't matter who he's in there with, he's always, like, putting in an effort. And I think that's why he's always had, like, a really good fan base among CMLL fans, that they just see it, like, the fact that, like, he could be in, like, the worst match ever, but he's not to be blamed in that, because the one bright spot in that is usually him against whoever his opponent is, or just him himself. I'm hoping Mascara Dorada kind of follows that path a little more. Hopefully he didn't. You know, and then the other thing is that he was in WWE for so long. I hope he didn't get into those bad habits of being a WWE guy, because we've seen a lot of the WWE guys when they leave, it's like they don't really have that. And I'm not talking about the guys that I'm talking about like the luchadors that have been there. They kind of come back and it's like, they're not the same. So we get that about Mascara Dorada possibly returning to CMLL. Again, the paperwork, who knows when that's going to happen. It's immigration paperwork takes a long time, especially right now with what's going on with the pandemic. A lot of stuff, like if you've had to do anything government related where you have to deal with a government agency, it's going to take a little longer just because I've had to deal with funerals, my dad's funeral, and then I also had to deal with my parents' house. And a lot of the times we would send paperwork, it would, like, stuff that would normally get sent within a month, instead of taking a month, would take 4 to 6 months. So this type of paperwork is going to take a little longer. Hopefully he started the process as soon as he started like planning to leave. If he didn't start back then it's probably going to take a little longer. Hopefully it's soon, because I do think I want to see him back in CMLL. Just for the very least, it's something different. And I think there's a level of happiness for a lot of us CMLL fans that at least as bad as the show is, who knows, maybe Mascara Dorada can bring something. I'm looking forward to, like, if they do Mascara Dorada versus Templario, I think that would be an excellent match. Hopefully that does happen. I think that's another guy. Templario is another guy who's very self-motivated, and it comes across in his matches. I think Templario is probably the one that I think of all the guys in CML that, because I think Hechicero probably would be the other one, but he seems happy in CMLL. But I think Templario would be the one guy that if he left, I think he would get so many requests from. I mean, he could just make one appearance on an indie show, and I think right away he would start getting a lot of requests to be part of to be on more shows, because he's really good. I mean, and that was the thing. Like when NGD left CMLL, I thought, I don't think they're going to be a group of guys that are going to be in high demand internationally, just because their work doesn't really suit what people view as lucha libre. They're more of a trio. And I don't think I don't know how easy it is for a promotion to bring in 3 guys at once. I would think they would want either tag team or just a singles guy. And, they're not, even though they were in CMLL and they were top guys in CMLL, there's still not that familiarity with them. So, I think it's going to be hard for them. But like somebody like Hechicero, Templario, Sobrano Jr., I think those guys would probably do well if they really wanted. I think at some point that's going to be an issue, that those guys are probably going to be the ones that are going to start having issues. And unless the Lucha Roth family changes their way of thinking, they're going to lose even more talent, which I don't think they care about, because they'll just, like I said, to them, it's like they'll just bring in somebody new, and that new person is just going to continue. It's if you look at the history of CMLL, this is something that has happened from the very beginning, from the moment Salvador Lucha started the promotion forward. You always had this thing where, if somebody was disgruntled or a group of wrestlers were disgruntled, they would leave. Sometimes they would get vetoed or banned from ever appearing again on CMLL shows or EMLL shows. And, the few that would come back, they would come back, but they wouldn't stay for too long. It was always, they would try to commit to being more independent. And you saw that over the years. This would always come back. Money issues, they would always. This goes back to Rey Mendoza and his issues with the Lucha Roth family in the past. I think there's a little bit more forgiveness just because from the wrestler side, just because they feel that there's a connection to that family, and the fact that as bad as that promotion may have treated them, it was mostly about money, and it wasn't so much how they would talk to them, how they would actually get paid, basically. Like, they might not get paid the most, but they would actually at the very least get paid. And other promoters, they would always have these issues where they might get paid more with another promotion or working somewhere else, but then they would also have the issue, like, every once in a while, like, somebody wouldn't pay them. And that kind of works. It's the unfortunate thing. So, like, if I would have done this podcast maybe a week and a half ago, I think the big story back then probably would have been Stuka Jr. versus Atlantis Jr. I think that might be the if you told me to like pick if you came up with like a predictor of what the big main event will be for the next CMLL anniversary show, I think Stuka Jr. versus Atlantis Jr. would have to be high on the list. I don't think they should do a mask match this year. I think they should just do another Night of Champions again with fans voting. I know they said they wanted to do that a separate month, but I think they really should hold off on doing a mass match until next year, until 2023, or even the earliest 2023 or the latest 2024, because I don't think it makes sense to do a mass match when you can't sell out the arena. The guy's not going to make money. And I think Stuka Jr., if they did Stuka Jr. versus Atlantis Jr., that would actually be a money program. The problem is it's CMLL, the current booking programming department is really bad at just coming up with the storyline. I think this would have been perfect, because I mean, you have the Mystico Averno feud also going on. You have Super Muñeco Jr. and Atlantis Jr. kind of, they had a little bit of a issue late last year. So you have all these other things that you could have combined into it, and you could have just kept building it up. And then, probably by June, you could have had something already planned, and you could have done Stuka Jr. versus Atlantis Jr. And I think Stuka Jr., the fact that he has a son that is following his footsteps into pro wrestling and is probably going to end up being in CMLL at some point also, I think he probably would have put his mask on the line and even dropped it to Atlantis Jr. Because you do need to start building up Atlantis Jr. I do think they're doing a better job with Atlantis Jr. I don't really know if it's them, more so Atlantis Jr. himself doing it, because I think he can't follow the same path that his dad did. Very different time periods. I mean, back in the 80s, Atlantis could go on for 20 years as a top babyface, and it would have been perfectly fine. There would have been a strong fan base for him. And nowadays, the Rudo crowd, there's a far stronger heel fan base now in Mexico that, to me, it might actually make more sense to turn Atlantis Jr. heel at some point and have him have a heel run, because and do the same thing that you've done like they've done in the past, like with the Paraguayo in the 70s, Rey Mendoza. Prior to that, that heel that later becomes a baby face and becomes a beloved baby face. I think you could do that with Atlantis Jr. Atlantis Jr. has been very good. I must admit, I think a lot of people are kind of hard on him. There's two wrestlers that get a lot of grief, and there's a lot, but these two get the most. Atlantis Jr. and Psycho Clown. I've noticed people just constantly ripping on them. When I did my top 10 of 2021 and had Psycho Clown in it, there were people who were like, yeah, how is he a top 10 guy? And it's like, to me, that just tells me you're just into Lucha Libre. You're only watching it for the high spots. You're not watching it for the body of everything. You're not body of work. You're not looking at the characters. You're not looking at what they're doing, not just what they're doing in the ring, but the fact that how they're pushed, storylines. Psycho Clown was in the freaking top storyline in AAA for the first half of 2021, for much of 2021, really. And even like the other storyline in AAA that followed, he was pretty much a big part of that as well. He's probably the busiest working luchador in Mexico as far as getting bookings, not just in Mexico, but now in the US. The guy is very much in demand, very popular. And, he may not be Negro Navarro or Virus in the ring as far as a technical wrestler. He might not be the best high flyer in the business, but the dude is a great brawler. I would put him up there with, I even said it, he's up there with LA Park and Rush as far as brawling. He might even be better than Rush too. But I think he's one of the best all around wrestlers in Mexico. And I think the fact that he had that great match with Gringo Loco kind of opened the eyes. It just cracked me up when people were like, oh man, I didn't realize Psycho Clown was as good. It's like, yes, he's that good. It's like, you don't really pay attention to AAA. And then there's fans who shit on AAA nonstop. And Psycho Clown catches a lot of that heat because he is the AAA. He is the face of AAA, and people just like to shit on him. And the funny thing is, like, when a wrestler passes away, that's when they all think, oh, he was amazing. He was great. Like La Parca, the AAA La Parca. Suddenly everybody remembers, like, you could tell people he was a draw, and he was a popular, and they would be like, and that was enough to make him a top wrestler in Mexico, and people would still be like, yeah, you're wrong, or you're not. And it's like, no, it's like you have to look at it beyond just, oh, can he do a leg? Can he get you in a leg lock? Can he do a tope? No, it has to be the entire character. The guy Psycho Clown is a really great character. He's a superstar. And, to me, it's like Atlantis Jr. is kind of falling into that category. He's somebody who is he's in the shadow of his father, who was a huge star for decades. but he's kind of also, if you watch him talk, he's a far better interviewer than his dad was ever. His dad was never that good of an interview. Atlantis Jr. is a really good interview. I remember when he first started. Remember, he couldn't put anybody in the Atlantida. He's able to do it now. He's gotten stronger. I remember when they put him in that heavyweight category for the fan vote for the anniversary, and I thought, man, that's ridiculous. He's not a heavyweight. I thought, at best he's like a middleweight. But sure enough, he worked out. He does look a little bit bigger. I do still think he's more of a light heavyweight, kind of in the Hechicero role, where Hechicero's a heavyweight now, just because by default there's not a lot of heavyweights in CMLL, and if you really want to just stick to heavyweights, it's just gonna be a lot of plodding big guys. You would have had to have dealt with DMT Azul or Cranio or Volcano. It's not most of the other heavyweights aren't really heavyweights. Terrible is the one that I would say is really good. But if you want to make it more of a open type of heavyweight division, then you're going to have to open it up to everybody else. And they've done so with Ultimo Guerrero and now Hechicero, and obviously now with Atlantis Jr. and even Carvanario's kind of been used as a heavyweight. But he's kind of, I think he's somebody that can be the face of CMLL for years to come. Granted, they're going to have to do like a lot. Pretty much he could be like a Mystico type. But he's going to have to they're going to have to let him develop. And I do think they should turn him heel, just because I think it would be an interesting storyline to have him aligning with his dad's biggest rival, Ultimo Guerrero, and, Gran Guerrero as a trio. Templario is kind of already on the outs with that group, so you have that also as part of the storyline. I think that's something that I think would be fun to watch. Yeah, so I think that's actually to me that's the early front runner for mask match at the anniversary show, Atlantis Jr. versus Stuka Jr. Should they do it this year? I don't think they should. I think they should wait another year. But that should be something that should be in the back burner, as far as hey, we're going to do this at some point. Let's just keep it there just in case. And I think it would be a good match, because Stuka Jr. He's one of those guys that's kind of also been around CML for a really long time. Has been a little bit repetitive, but he's actually still pretty good. I think he's a good worker, and I think him versus Atlantis Jr. would be a really good main event. I think it would be kind of in that Niebla Roja Gran Guerrero type, where people might not think it's going to be that great, but it turns out catching us by surprise and being, a pretty decent match. The other big news that happened was on Tuesday. AAA announced that the first round matchups for the Ruleta de la Muerte with Mask on the line that is set for the 3 Triple Mania events. The first round will be happening on April 30th in Monterrey, and those matchups will be Psycho Clown versus Canek, LA Park versus Viano 4, Pentagon Jr. versus Ultimo Dragon, and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. versus Blue Demon Jr. I thought it was kind of cool, the matchups they came up with. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. versus Blue Demon Jr. kind of bringing back the history between their fathers. Rayo de Jalisco Jr.'s father, Rayo de Jalisco, dropped his mask to Blue Demon, I think back in '89. So there's that storyline going on from that. Obviously, he dropped it when he was really, really old by that point. Both men were very old by that point, but they kind of wanted just to do that. And that's something that it's a good callback to that feud, bringing it now to the present. The Psycho Clown versus Canek, I thought it was funny because there's such a big age disparity between these two. But really, if you look at it, it's really like Psycho Clown representing AAA versus Canek, who's representing the past big promotion, El Toreo, Promociones Mora, UWA, whatever you want to call it. But it's kind of that. Canek can barely walk nowadays, but that's what they wanted, and there's still a lot of fans who are very curious about that. That's one thing you'll see. The one thing you will see with Lucha is that if a guy doesn't drop his mask, if you don't drop your mask, you don't age as quickly to fans as you would if you drop your mask. And I think that's what always hurt Blue Panther. The fact that when he dropped his mask, it kind of just aged him quickly in front of the eye, in the fans' eyes, that he could never really be a single star on it afterwards. Although he kind of kept himself relevant just because he was a really good worker, and he started doing the old man tope suicidas, and people thought that was cool. And then his sons followed his footsteps into CMLL, and he's kind of been able to maintain his career at a high level, at a reasonably high level. I would say upper mid card, semi main event, occasional main eventer. But it's like he's not the same as he. Actually, he still did have that one brief run feuding with Felino and Negro Casas, and that was kind of a main event type of feud. So he still had a couple of feuds late in his career. Maybe not as many as he wished he had, but it still was around. So Kanek, guys like Kanek, Rayo, Blue Demon Jr., the fact that they haven't dropped their mask, it still keeps them a little bit younger. I think everybody knows, the fact that Kanek's been wrestling since like since the mid 70s, you already know the guy's got to be past, pushing past 60. So you already know he's really old. The other two matchups with Ali Park versus Villano 4, I kind of made a comment that this is like the meeting of former WCW luchadors, but they've had matches in Mexico as well. Ali Park's going to have to carry that. Last time Villano 4 was around, he wasn't really the moving as well as he used to. Then there's the Pentagon Jr. Ultimo Dragon matchup, which is I think that's more of a nostalgia, and that got a lot of interest outside of Mexico, just because Ultimo Dragon is like he was basically what Pentagon Jr. is now, in this era where he was the cool person coming out of lucha. Ultimo Dragon in the mid 90s was the cool guy coming out of lucha and Japanese wrestling. He had all those belts, he had the cool look, he had the cool mask. He showed up in WCW holding all those belts. He just looked cool. He had the cool finisher, the cool moves. He moved really well. To me, that's kind of like that. And I could see Pentagon Jr. even being willing to lose the match. I imagine him being a big fan of Ultimo Dragon, so I could see him dropping the fall for him. Whoever loses, I don't think it's gonna affect them. But to me, Kanek and Rayo de Jalisco Jr., they're not gonna want to lose. They're very hard. Kanek especially, he very rarely loses. So I have a feeling those two are gonna win for sure. And then I think it's a toss up in the other two matches. I could see Ali Park. I think Ali Park's gonna win, and I think I could see Pentagon Jr. Ultimo Dragon going either way, just because I could see them wanting at least, if you have Psycho Clown, and then it's Blue Demon Jr. can still kind of go, but if you're gonna have like Rayo or somebody that's not that mobile, you need at least one guy in there that's gonna be able to move around and keep the match interesting. So to me, that's why you kind of have to I think you almost have, to me, the ideal situation would be that everybody that was really, three of the really good guys end up losing and advancing to the next round, just because you want to keep good matches going. But it's a tournament. I don't think it's going to matter, because I'm sure the main event is what everyone's going to want to watch, and there's going to be other matches on the card that people are going to find far more interesting than this. To me, this is more about getting the mask off of somebody who was a huge star at some point in their careers. And all 8 of these guys in this tournament, even if you think Villano 4 is a low in the totem pole, he's still a name, a big name, somebody who was in WCW, who was a star in Toreo, AAA, CMLL. He was all over the place, independence. So he's somebody who's been around for a long time. So even if he drops his mask, that's still a pretty significant mask loss. But I think, and everybody, the odds are that he's going to end up being the one that drops it. I think there's some people that think maybe Ultimo Dragon might drop it. He did wrestle as Asai, so maybe he decides, maybe I want to get a big payoff, and Mexico would probably pay me off for this. So it might make sense. I could see him also being, if you gave me to list 8, list them in order from most likely to drop mask to least likely. I think first I would put in most likely Villano 4. Second would be Ultimo Dragon. Third, I would probably put, I think after those two, I don't think the odds of everybody else would be very slim. Third, I think I could see Blue Demon. Actually not Blue Demon Jr. Actually, I don't even know. Third, I would probably think Rayo de Jalisco Jr. would probably be the third for me, because I think he's reaching that point in his career where he's getting older. I don't think he's gonna get booked that often. It's either Ryo or Connect. To me, it's Ryo third, fourth Connect, just because he's really old. Maybe he decides, it's time to, get a big payoff for his retirement. Fifth, I would probably say, I don't think any of the other guys, honestly. I think 1, 2. Like, let's just go 1, 2. Villano 4, Ultimo Dragon are the two guys I think are the most likely. Everybody else is kind of like I don't buy any of those guys dropping their mask. I would be shocked if it's any other person besides those two. I would be shocked. The other news from that press conference, where they announced the first round matches for Triple Mania's mask tournament. AAA also announced a monthly series of shows to be held at the Show Center complex in Monterey that will feature a Show Center championship tournament for both men and women. The first two that were announced for that were LA Park and Laredo Kid. LA Park, I brought his sons with him and kind of seemed to imply that his sons were also part of the tournament. I don't think that's the case, because they were talking about how that tournament was going to feature international stars. So I think they would want at least another AAA person, at least two more AAA people in this tournament, maybe two or another person that's not semi-regularly in AAA, and then that's a luchador, and then maybe 2 or 3 that are international names. That's how I see it. We'll find out a little bit more about that. It's an interesting idea. It's another tournament. We get so many tournaments in lucha that it's kind of like okay, another tournament. Finally, I want to talk about the 2021 Tapati Awards results, just because this kind of tells you what I was talking about earlier, how there's not, if you look at who is going to get, who the most popular luchadors are, as far as not just in Mexico, but internationally. And I pointed out how, you don't really see a lot of CMLL guys getting a lot of interest. You don't really see, you do have some fans that are oh, I wouldn't mind seeing this guy so-and-so in this promotion. But it's I would say the top 5 guys that have the most interest are probably guys who have already appeared in the US, or Hijo del Vikingo, who hasn't appeared and people are just waiting for him to make his way into the United States. Those are, to me, the guys that most people want to see. But to me, this kind of shows you, this year's voting kind of shows you how much more popular and how Hijo del Vikingo has become. He's not, I don't think he's I think it was kind of funny, because I think somebody wrote an article, I think it might have been for Mas Lucha or Super Luchas, where they were talking about how Hijo del Vikingo was this era's Mystico. I don't think I would compare him to that. I would compare him more to Rey Mysterio Jr., because Mystico was a huge draw when his peak during that boom period, whereas Rey Mysterio Jr. became a far bigger star internationally than he was in Mexico. What he was in Mexico was he was a really innovative wrestler, something that was very different, and he brought that to the United States and continued to do that as well while he was in WCW, and even in WWE. He just was a very talented wrestler. I kind of view Hijo del Vikingo in that mold more than a guy who is going to lead the next boom in Lucha Libre. I think he's somebody that I think his future is far greater as an international star, and I think it's going to happen at some point. But I think you look at these awards and you could tell that it's really something that we're waiting for to explode. Wrestler of the Year for 2021, the top 5, the winner was Hijo del Vikingo. Second place was Ares. Third place was Laredo Kid, and then that was followed by Hechicero and Bandito. I think Bandito. The thing that happens with Bandito, I think there's a lot of people that kind of soured on him, the way he handled his promotion, and they kind of took that into what he is as far as a wrestler. Not to mention the fact that he caught COVID a few times, and there's a lot of people that are very they have these very strong opinions about how people handle dealing with COVID. Even if you're vaccinated and all this stuff, you could still get COVID. But there's a lot of people that think that because you're getting COVID, you're not being safe. And I think there's a lot of people that if somebody said, "Oh, I have COVID," "Oh, great, you're just not taking care of yourself." But sometimes it just happens. If you're going to work, you're going to school, you're around people, odds are you're gonna have there's a pretty good chance you're gonna get COVID, unless you're totally a hermit. it's going to be impossible for you not to have to experience or feel concerned about it, where you're actually having to get a home test to make sure you're not dealing with that. So to me, it's like, yeah, he went through it, but it's like everybody's going through it. I think the thing was that he made it public. There's been other luchadors that have battled COVID, never made it public, and and I think that's probably what hurt him more. Also, the thing about booking Travis Banks didn't do him any favors either. Though I didn't know about it. Fortunately, he didn't book him again. But I think this is the problem. Like, a lot of people don't realize. The thing about it is that you're gonna have to realize that in Mexico, they don't really care about like a lot of that stuff. Like, there's guys who domestic abuse, heavy drinkers, other sorts of issues, and they're still like getting work in Mexico. So it's like you can't really like it's very difficult to judge. It's wrong, but it continues. I mean, look, CMLL, AAA, they hired Love Machine Arbora, and he was accused, he had a very serious issue back in Portland that pretty much cost him his job in WCW. And, he became a superstar in Mexico. So it's like, it's very difficult to figure out what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and I do think he probably regrets doing that, but bringing in Travis Banks, but look at it now he's in IWRG, and I am almost 100% positive that guy will end up either in AAA or CMLL before the end of the year. I'm pretty sure he will be on one of those shows, just because that's the way the promotions work. They don't really think about that stuff. They think, the guy, the guy paid it, he paid his dues, or he served his time, his punishment, he can't work elsewhere. Let's bring him in. A talented, and he's a good wrestler and everything. So it's like, that's going to happen at some point. But yeah, Hijo del Vikingo by far and away is like the biggest star in Mexico, and the one that I think is going to have the most potential to do other things. Then we get to the best match, and again, Hijo del Vikingo versus Ares from Riot. It's March 21st show. Second place, Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. versus Hijo del Vikingo and Laredo Kid from AAA's October 9th show, Heroes Immortales. And then Bandito versus Volador Jr. from March 26th, the CMLL show. And again, what did I say about Volador Jr.? It takes the other guy to like at least make him want to feel like it's important. And Bandito was able to get that out of Volador Jr. That was a great match. If you didn't watch it, highly recommend finding a way to watch that match. Same thing with Hijo del Vikingo versus Ares and the tag match. Those three matches were on my list. I think I had it different. I think I had Bandito versus Volador Jr. as my match of the year, and then the other two followed. I think it might have been that, or I may have voted for Hijo del Vikingo and Ares, because I was really into that match. That match was really good. Even though I watched it with the technical issues, it was still an excellent match. Best promotion, AAA by a wide margin. Then there was Riot, and then CMLL. Honestly, none of them probably deserved it, best promotion, just because they all were having issues. AAA with the whole lawsuit, and the fact that it really, to watch AAA, and this is what amazes me, to watch AAA depended on Cubs fan being able to put it up on Twitch. Basically, it's ridiculous. Like, what if one day Cubs fan was like, yeah, fuck it, I don't have time to do this, and he has something else to do. Then you don't get that show, and it probably had a match of the year candidate, and nobody knows. But like, as far as in the United States, and yeah, those in Mexico could watch it, but it's like you don't really get a lot of Mexican people, lucha fans don't really talk about like, oh, this was in the match of the year, you should watch it. Very few people do that. Best unit, Lucha Brothers, followed by Poder del Norte and Jinetes del Aire. Again, this kind of is showing you how little impact there was from CMLL, because you had all the factions that followed these were all AAA or indie factions. I think the closest one might have been the Canceberos, and I think they might have been 6th or 7th. Best feud, there were not a lot of feuds in 2021. I don't remember there being a really memorable feud. I mean, they had rivalries that were very short-lived, but nothing really that was, other than maybe guys being upset at each other and calling calling each other out on social media, but it wasn't like an actual feud within, the, like, if you told me to pick the feud of the year, it's probably Soberano Jr. Ultimo Girl and Soberano Jr. trashing Ultimo Girl, but that wasn't a feud. That was just him voicing his opinion. But best feud was Rey Scorpion versus Psycho Clown. I think that really was the best feud there. And if you put none, same. I mean, I could have agreed with you. Most improved. To me, I always find most improved very difficult, just because it has to be somebody that has really greatly improved. There's times where somebody's good and they just improve that much more. This year's winner was Commander, and followed by Atlantis Jr. and Latigo. I think I voted for Atlantis Jr. Because he did improve. That's the thing. It's like I do see some progression, and like at the same time, there was a period of time where he kind of just seemed a little bit lost. When he first showed up, he looked pretty good in the ring, but he wasn't really doing that much. And then he also kind of like started struggling to do the Atlantida and doing certain spots. And then like the second year, he kind of just, he was all right. And I think he might have missed a couple of, well, obviously the pandemic, everyone missed time. And then 2021, he kind of got a little bit more, he looked way better in the ring. And like I said, he's a really good interview. I think he's somebody that, like I said, he definitely is somebody who's going to be a star. I'm just kind of curious how big a star he's going to be, and whether or not it's going to be full time in CMLL, just because the way CMLL is handling talent, it's not very good. Favorite wrestler, again, Hijo del Vikingo, followed by Hechicero and Mystico. That sounds about right. When you talk about diehard Lucha fans, those three seem to fit the criteria. Mystico being the star of the boom period. Hechicero's kind of like the work rate guy, the one that all of us who are fans of technical wrestling would pick him. And Hijo del Vikingo, of course, being the flashy, hot, young, high flyer. He kind of fits that. I think all three of them kind of fit a specific criteria as far as fandom. But overall, I thought that was an interesting voting. And like again, I said Hijo del Vikingo. He's somebody that I think is going to be a special star. Hopefully he does get his everything worked out where he can actually travel to the United States. I could see him being somebody who ends up getting a deal with I could see, like, I don't know, maybe AEW, just because I think as good as he has been, and AAA has finally realized that they have to get behind him, I think there's always that risk with AAA that at some point they lose interest in somebody, they start kind of lowering them, and they start elevating somebody else, and that kind of changes. And, you also have to like go for find new horizons, and he's the type of guy that really needs that type of thing, because he's like I said, he's innovative. I mean, when guys are innovative, it's hard for them. I think it's hard for them to stay in one place for a long stretch of time, just because it's going to be, they want to try new things. Well, that's it for this week. Be sure to check out the latest news updates at LuchaWorld.com. If you're into old school wrestling, check out my other site, RetroWrestling.com, and you can also check out the Retro Wrestling YouTube channel for show reviews, podcasts, interviews, etc. You can also become a patron by joining the LuchaWorld Patreon at patreon.com/LuchaWorld. I add Lucha Magazine write-ups, the Lucha Classica podcast, and at the $5 tier, you get DVD ISO files of wrestling shows in my collection. All that and more. Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back again soon.